Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we are looking at the work, and really the mind, of someone who has completely redefined how we see our own past. We're talking, of course, about the legendary documentarian Ken Burns. If you've ever thought history was, just a dry recitation of facts and dates from a dusty classroom lesson, Ken Burns is the guy who proved that history is actually the most thrilling, approachable, and dramatic story we have. Today we're going to explore his unique approach to making history come alive, and what his upcoming projects reveal about how we view ourselves.
Okay, let's dive right into this because Burns operates on one really profound realization. I make films about the US, but I make films about us. And that idea right there is the absolute heartbeat of everything we're going to look at today. Burns isn't just archiving the past, right? He's holding up a mirror to the present. He's showing us that the history of a nation is ultimately just a reflection of who we are right now. Our human nature, our struggles, and our shared identity.
And when it comes to capturing that shared identity, well, his track record totally speaks for itself. 15. That is the massive number of Emmy Awards Ken Burns has won over his career, and that's right alongside 2 Academy Award nods and 2 Grammys. This incredible critical success really establishes him as a masterful storyteller. I mean, he takes topics from jazz to baseball to the national parks, and he elevates them into these massive cultural events. So how exactly does a filmmaker with such a huge, celebrated body of work actually choose his next big idea?
Section 1. The process of discovery.
Well, it starts with a wonderfully refreshing perspective. He says, I don't want to tell you stories about what I know. I'd rather share with you a process of discovery. Think about that. Burns deliberately dives into subjects he doesn't know enough about yet. He doesn't view his documentaries, actually, or our explainer today for that matter, as rigid textbooks. Instead, he views them as shared journeys. He is literally learning right alongside the audience.
His mental process for this is fascinating. At any given time, his head is just filled with 40 or 50 purely intellectual topics. But he doesn't just pick one at random. A topic has to pass a crucial filter. It has to drop down from the head to the heart. It has to connect emotionally. Once that happens, the project is firing on all cylinders, and he knows for sure he has his next film. And that heart-first approach brings us directly to his highly anticipated upcoming project, which signals a fascinating shift in how he tackles monumental, world-changing historical shifts.
Section 2. Inventing the Citizen.
This upcoming project is driven by one very specific number: 250. We're marking the 250th anniversary of the start of the American War of Independence, which began in the colonies of British America way back in 1775.
To capture an anniversary of that kind of sheer magnitude, Burns is delivering something massive. The American Revolution is a 12-hour, 6-part series airing on PBS. It's an expansive, incredibly deep dive into the 18th century, exploring what Burns calls one of the most important events in all of human history.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why he considers it so fundamentally important. See, it wasn't just a war over land or taxes. It was a total ideological shift that changed the world. People transitioned from being subjects to a completely new, invented concept: citizens. That single shift in human identity set democratic revolutions in motion all around the globe. Now, understanding these grand historical shifts naturally brings up a question about how time itself operates.
Which brings us to Section 3. Rhyming, not repeating.
I want you to ask yourself this question right now. Is history doomed to repeat itself? We hear it all the time, right? When we look at global conflicts or political upheavals, it is so tempting to think we're just stuck in an endless loop. But Burns has a very specific, nuanced take on this.
There's this famous 19th century perspective from philosopher George Santayana. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. It's a popular, albeit somewhat bleak, view. But Burns doesn't actually subscribe to this idea that history is a broken record. Instead, he aligns with a thought attributed to American author Mark Twain.
History doesn't repeat itself, but it does often rhyme. Let's just let that sit for a second. This is the winning philosophy for Ken Burns. He uses this exact lens to find the echoes of the past in our present. Events are never exact carbon copies of each other, but the human behaviors, the motivations, the patterns, they rhyme. And because history is made by humans, it is inherently complex and, as you'll see, often deeply flawed.
Section 4. Patriotism and Painful Truths.
Burns comes at history from a place of really deep foundational patriotism. He says, growing up, I had a kind of idealized version of my country.
I love my country. In fact, he states he doesn't know anyone who loves their country more than he does. But that love doesn't blind him. Rather, it demands absolute honesty.
His method insists that patriotism absolutely does not mean erasing the past. Burns is committed to historical reality, which means uncomfortable truths must be shown. A primary example he brings up is Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson is a figure who embodies soaring democratic ideals, yet, as Burns points out, Jefferson owned slaves. He knew it was wrong, but he kept doing it. By presenting these facts neutrally and clearly, Burns demonstrates that historical figures can simultaneously harbor brilliant ideals and deep moral failures.
Which brings us right back to our recurring thematic anchor. I make films about the US, but I make films about us. So the crucial point is that acknowledging these painful, uncomfortable truths isn't about tearing down history. It's about fully understanding our collective identity. It's about accepting all the rhymes of our past so we can better understand who us really is today. So it's such a massive historical lens. What exactly comes next for a filmmaker as prolific as Ken Burns?
Section 5. Chronicling the Future.
Interestingly, Burns also applies his rigorous historical method to recent events, but with a very strict rule. Perspective takes time. For example, he's been working on a project about former President Barack Obama's administration, but he's deliberately allowing time to pass before conducting interviews. He understands that the longer he waits, the clearer the perspective will be, allowing the true historical significance to naturally reveal itself.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because this patience creates an incredible timeline of upcoming deep dives. We have the 12-hour epic on the American Revolution finishing up in 2025. Then, that carefully paced look at the Obama administration. And looking even further ahead to the 2030s, he already has his eyes set on a comprehensive history of the CIA. I mean, he literally has enough material to last well into the next decade.
But when you have a timeline like that, dozens of massive documentaries spanning from the 18th century to the modern intelligence era, it begs a pretty great question. What is the most important project? Well, to answer this, Burns shares a brilliant anecdote about the legendary and incredibly prolific composer Duke Ellington. Ellington had somewhere around 2,400 compositions to his name, and someone once asked him which of his thousands of pieces was the most important.
And Ellington just replied, "The one I'm working on now." Burns says that this is exactly how he and his team feel. It perfectly captures his laser-focused, ever-curious mindset. Despite the massive legacy behind him and the decades of work planned ahead of him, the most important history is the history he is uncovering in this exact moment.
Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought. If Ken Burns is right, if history is not just about the US, but truly about us, all of us, then I want you to look around at your present moment. What will the historical records of today, the rhyming patterns of our current culture, reveal about who we are right now? It's a pretty profound lens to view the world through, don't you think? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, and I will see you next time.